Welcome to the EVready Podcast, featuring industry leaders and their perspectives on electrification, hosted by EVready Energy. Hey everybody, welcome to the EVready Podcast. This is your host, Chris Nihan, and I am grateful to introduce our guest for today, Pat Romano, former CEO of ChargePoint and current ChargePoint advisor. Pat, thanks for joining.
Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Yeah, totally. I was always kind of looking forward to this one because I always know we have good conversations. And yeah, definitely kind of interested, especially, not post ChargePoint, but post ChargePoint CEO, kind of like what your take is on the industry and everything like that. So thanks for taking the time. But first question for you is, you've had a few months, not, I guess officially in ChargePoint anymore. Tell us about what you've been up to, how you're doing, and what you miss most about, just I guess being at ChargePoint every day.
Well, I mean, obviously, I can answer the last one first. I was at ChargePoint 13 years, and I'm still in touch with a lot of folks there, and I'm as an advisor, I'm still in the office, not nearly as frequently as I used to be, but I'm still engaged with the folks there. And obviously, what you miss, aside from I love the industry, right? Is you miss the personal interactions with all the great folks. It really, you were there for a long time. It's a special place. There's really great people. It's the reason I think a lot of people get out of bed in the morning. They get out of bed for two reasons, or they leave companies for two reasons. They're both the same reasons. On the positive side, you got to love the mission and you got to love the people, and you really need to love both of them. And that glues a team together, right? It glues people together. And if either one of those things falter, right, mission or team, then you start to imagine a world where you're not doing that anymore. And that never happened to me there. I always loved the team and loved the mission. And that's what I was supposed about it.
You told me about a gift that you received from the team before you left. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So, God, they're just awesome. So because the only social media posts for me are races, triathlon, been into triathlon for ages. And so a couple of years ago, I had a ChargePoint custom paint job on my bike. That's not the gift. We'll get to the gift in a second. So, I bleed orange. So I had the whole paint job on my triathlon bike. And so the team decided that they would get me a custom graphic ChargePoint, kind of like the gear you race in, the suit you race in. It's like a one-piece bike kit. It looks like bike clothes, but it's all one piece. And it is fully ChargePoint branded. Wonderful job by the marketing team there, and they presented that to me. About a couple of weeks after I left, they had me back for a surprise party, and just really sweet gesture, really awesome.
That's really cool. I've seen the bike. The bike's awesome. I'll be looking for the garb on Facebook.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm racing in March, and that'll be the first time that I'll be out on the course, not only with a ChargePoint bike, but fully branded ChargePoint race kit. So look for the post.
That's awesome. Noted. So tell us about what's next. Where do you see yourself? What do you want to do? How are you going to spend your time?
I think I've said this to you before. I have two irrational fears. I say this to everybody. The first irrational fear has nothing to do with work. It's general anesthetic. If you ask my wife, if I have, need stitches or something like that, or stitches, you don't get general anesthetic. But if I ever needed it, I'd break out cold sweat. The second thing that gives me an equivalent reaction is boredom, or the fear of boredom. So I'm already engaged with several companies. I haven't figured out what I want to do longer term. I'm interested in a bunch of areas. I'm interested in, obviously, peripherally the industry I came from. I don't think I would do it in a charging company directly because I'm loyal to ChargePoint, first of all. But second, I've done that for 13 years. But other things in energy, I think could be interesting. Robotics is an interesting field for me. Nuclear is an interesting field for me. Um, there's a lot of interesting things, and a friend of mine actually has a drone company that's in stealth mode right now. Really great applications. It's not what you think with respect to drones. It's something totally different that I can't talk much about right now. Um, and what I'm doing is I'm getting involved with things, but I'm not. I'm trying to organically let the next opportunity kind of come into focus in my brain as to what I want to do. I'm fortunate enough that my kids are out of the house, and I don't have the pressing need to make that decision overnight. And I want to just make sure it's impactful. I don't want to do anything with my career that's not impactful. So I want to figure out what benefits I think society the most, and what areas that can I work on benefit societies the most. And the other thing is I get a lot of excitement of working with bright people that are really committed to some brand new passionate project. I've done zero to something 4 times in my career, and I have a lot of respect for that. So I'm very busy. My day is very busy right now, oddly, with a lot of diversity right now, a lot of diversity on my plate. So I'm pretty happy right now. But
Yeah, awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing your next thing. I know you're not going to do something that doesn't have a purpose. I think you definitely didn't have to tell me that that was your mentality, but it'll be really interesting to see.
no, it's kind of yours too, right? Look at what you're doing.
Totally, totally. Yeah, I mean, you have limited time and you want to spend it somewhere that matters.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your previous industry for a second. So, the past 24 months has been interesting in the EV charging industry. And, for me talking to car dealerships and auto manufacturers, like everybody has their opinion on what consumers think, where the industry is going to go. I know we share the same opinion. We know what's going to happen. It's just a matter of how quickly. But just in terms of the charging network providers, and what we've seen on the stock market in general in the industry, and then the role that some of the largest companies in the industry or just affiliated with the industry, what their roles are going to be. I'm thinking large energy companies, oil companies, auto manufacturers, large utilities. Like, what's happening right now? I think I always hear like the term there's this is the year that there's some type of a market correction. Like, what does that mean or not mean to you?
I think it's all a bunch of noise from a lot of people that don't know what the hell they're talking about. And here's the reason. Here's what's not being talked about. So first of all, um, you've got macroeconomic undulations, and you've got early market peaks and valleys as you're basically trying to change. One of the hardest things to change is how people drive. You're trying to change that. And it's the right thing, but it takes, first of all, full coverage of all the makes and models that are necessary to basically service everyone's different lifestyle needs, a healthy used market on vehicles. You've got that coupled with the highest interest rates we've seen in decades, which is slowing down any CapEx purchase, cars being the second biggest CapEx purchase, next to your house, that consumers buy. And despite that, there still is quite healthy growth in EV sales. It's modulated relative to the go-go years of low interest rates, et cetera, right? Automakers are being, I think, a little bit more reticent, the legacy ones, with respect to maintaining profitability. I mean, I frankly think that some of them are probably using it as an excuse, because change is really hard when you have an existing business that you're trying to transition. And a born electric EV company, I'm not saying they have it easy, they don't have it easy. Okay. They just get a different set of issues. But one of the issues they don't have is they don't have to basically protect the transition. They don't have to protect the transition. It's different. It's a very different. They have a whole bunch of other challenges, but that's not one of them. And so it's so noisy. Every article that I read, frankly, not everyone, but most of them I want to throw in the trash because they're the premise is just clickbait in general. But I think there's a couple of fundamental truisms that I think your audience needs to pay attention to. Number one, what you're seeing from a stock market perspective on a lot of the companies attacking charging in different ways. There's asset owners, and now we can get into that in a minute because that's, you asked about the role of the oil company, and that's really an asset ownership model. It's very different than ChargePoint's model. We sell technology. We sell, every charger you see that's from ChargePoint isn't owned by us. We glue it all together in one network, but we're paid to keep that glued onto a network. So it's quite much more like Airbnb and much less like a hotel chain. It's almost a perfect analogy. Is Airbnb glues together a lot of properties they don't own into something that a consumer can interact with, largely what ChargePoint does. Largely, there's a wholesale, effectively a build your own charging service, and on a more wholesale basis on ChargePoint, which ChargePoint does as well. But if you blur your eyes and you look at all this, it comes down to the fact that there's not enough cars out there yet, because that's the tan glass ceiling over our heads. We're, a little over percent penetrated or so into the install base. We got 99 to go. And so the companies aren't profitable yet. And when you had a shift in access to capital, where we effectively had zero interest rates forever, and now suddenly it's the highest interest rates we've seen in decades, the public market investors shift from growth to you better be profitable and turning in EPS growth and dividends, or we're basically out of here. And so that's what you've seen. So there's no correlation. It's not like the companies are any different than they were in the old world order. It's the evaluators changed on those companies. So you can't look at the stock performance and say, oh, they used to do well, but they're not doing well anymore. The same company is the same companies. It's not just ChargePoint. The same set of companies are out there being now measured by a different yardstick. And it's not like you can sit around as a company and say, oh, okay, now I get it. Now public company investors want us to be profitable, so they will throw a switch and it'll be profitable. There's not a TAM to do that. So where I think it's going is it's a gift. It's a gift to the companies that have the best business models and the best tech. And the reason it's a gift is it's going to accelerate the shakeout. Every industry, when it matures, gets down to 2 or 3 players, right? In a given geography, it gets down to 2 or 3 players. And so this is just going to accelerate that whole process. And it's going to teach companies, I think, the best, it's cliche, but it's true, the best companies are built in the hardest of times. It's teaching companies where value is coming from. It's teaching them how to unlock efficiency that they weren't pressed to unlock before, because there was no focusing on growth and not necessarily focusing on efficiency, et cetera. So you're seeing that shift. It's a natural pressure. Some won't survive it. And a few will. I think ChargePoint's one of them, right? And what you'll have when you're on the backside of it is an incredible, amazing long-term growth cycle here. This is still, and I've said it many times when I was CEO of ChargePoint, this is the front end of a 2 decades growth cycle, because it's going to take that long to change out all the cars on both the fleet side and the consumer side. Oh my God. Yeah, you're going to have from this year to next different macroeconomic conditions. I consider a year or 2 years a very short term. So I think we have to define what short is. Short in my mind is a couple of years. Short in a public company investor's mind is a quarter, right? But for an industry that's barely a percent penetrated and with 99 to go, look at how close to profitability some of the good companies are that are in the space. So if you can do that at the penetration rates that you're talking now, imagine when you're 5, 10, 15% penetrated, you still got 80, 85, 90% of the market to go and you're profitable. And if you look at companies that are lasting enterprises right now, and the number of them out there, look at their historical stock chart from the dawn of them being public. And you'll see if they went public when they weren't profitable, whatever the stock price was, the minute they cross through that line, it shoots through the roof, regardless of market conditions. The market conditions that we're in now make that much worse. So I actually think the current conditions are a gift. The press is doing what the press does. I mean, I don't want to knock them. They have to sell advertising. And they love to generate a sensational headline. But the fact of the matter is just let it keep running.
Is there a market participant that you think is going to try and be one of the final two or three that doesn't exist yet?
Well, I mean, I think the way I would evaluate that is a little bit different than the way you pose the question, but the question's a good one. Who has the balance sheet to be able to survive through profitability? I think ChargePoint's one for sure, right? I think some of the bigger European oil and gas companies, if you take Shell and BP, right? I think they have religion about participating in this, but they have to participate in it in a narrow way. The narrow way is it's got to be, fast charge serving long haul drivers. I think many of them think that they can get people to use it as primary fuel, but it ain't. So they'll have a role. But we all know where most charging, if you've been in the business or in an EV, where does it happen? 80% or so is happening where you live, and that's going to have in multifamily as well. Where you work is another big place where that happens. Around town a little bit when you're shopping, use it opportunistically. You plug in and top up opportunistically. It's not a huge percentage there, but it's there, and it's got to be there in the ecosystem everywhere because you need that charging coverage for that case where you aren't planning. And then when you go a few times a year, you go on a long trip, that's when that asset ownership model might work. But that really, if you look at liquid fuel, has been the bastion of the convenience store. And the reason is they can combine the business models using fuel as bait to get you to stop, right? And then they can sell you stuff. And so they can run a very close to break even business on the fuel, high volume with very low gross margin. And they can top up the gross margin with essentially selling you higher gross margin stuff because you're a captive audience. And if you're an EV driver, you're more captive because you're going to be there for 15, 20 minutes, right? And if you're going to be there for 15 or 20 minutes, you're a better customer, but not as high frequency, right? So I think you're going to see the players that normally would exist in the fueling and convenience space potentially change because the parking configuration has to change. You need somewhere 5-6 times as many stalls. That's why if you look at fast charge sites, even with 1% penetration, they have more chargers or charging dispensers than gas pumps would be at a gas station. The reason is you're there a lot longer. So if you're there a lot longer, you're going to have that. And if you're sitting there a lot longer and you need more real estate, then the question is, what are the kinds of things you'd sell someone? Well, it might be different than what you sell someone when they're only there for a 4-minute stop for gasoline, right? And so those are the questions that I ask. Is the current model where you potentially own a charger and stick it in the back 40 of a parking lot, disconnected from another business without a cross subsidy model, that seems to be challenging in the long term because the way that gasoline is evolved, which is a very analogous use case in this one use case, only in this one use case, is that, hey, if I can sell you something while you're there, then I can play with the profitability across two domains, the fuel and what I'm selling you, and I can weight it heavily to what I'm selling you using the fuel as bait. If it goes that way in the long term, and the parking duration and the real estate has to be different where you put an EV charger, who are the likely companies that want to do that? Food service, light retail, lots of things. Anything you would do for 20 to 30 minutes.
Talk to me about NACS. So this means a lot of things to many people. Some people just think it's about a plug. Some people think something bigger is going on. And then I think a lot of people kind of tie, and I know this is a separate answer, but this would be the second question, back to Tesla's fast charging network and the data component of it. What data is Tesla getting? So the question is, is NACS just about the plug and the ease of use? Is it something bigger than that? And the second question is around Tesla's network and the communication of data between driver and Tesla. Is that a risk for auto manufacturers? How should people think about those things?
Yeah, I don't understand. I mean, from a business perspective, I don't understand why any auto manufacturer would let their competitor, and I'm nothing against Tesla, right? But I mean, they sort of handed it to them and basically like, hey, now we've endorsed a connector that wasn't a stand, it was a proprietary connector. But we're going to flip to that, and you can use this other car company's app. Whew, that's tough. That doesn't sound like, that doesn't sound like a good decision to me, if I were a legacy car company. And so now you see Iono was formed, right? So I think, maybe the strategy there is, hey, look, it's, we'll dilute that down in the long term, but I don't know. The whole thing's a mess. I think there really should have been, this is the one place, I'm not a big regulatory fan, but this is the one place where Europe got it right, is someone steps in and says, look, this is too mission critical. So you're talking about fuel here. You're all on the same goddamn connector, just pick one. Because they don't do anything different. This is the thing that, the press headlines. If I see one more headline that says Tesla has won the charging wars because the last car company, I forget who it was, to sign up for NACS. And I'm like, that doesn't mean anything. It's a connector. They changed connector types. They didn't hand anything to anybody. They changed connector types, and it's something that they should have all settled on a long time ago. I don't really care which one was picked. We never did it at ChargePoint because we're tail, not dog in that equation, right? We get wagged by the dog that is the auto companies out there. They should have been forced to pick one a long time ago, because it should have started even in the days of this whole CHAdeMO and CCS. That should have been put to bed. That was a mess. And allowing NACS to exist separately, three different connector types in the US has forced basically cable management nightmares on chargers, where you could have a much cleaner situation and just have one cable type. Because it doesn't work well through adapters. It works okay on AC charging, but it doesn't work well. It's clunky for AC charging, but it certainly doesn't work for DC charging at high speeds. You don't want to be going through an adapter where you can't guarantee that the pins are cool. So, and you don't want to have to back off on charging speeds as things get faster and faster in the future. So we've allowed it to perpetuate, and they all do. You can't, if you look at CHAdeMO, CCS, NACS, you can argue about the shape, right? Now you're talking about plastic, right? So you're arguing about shape. They all do exactly the same thing. It's not like, oh my God, look at the awesomeness of this one connector. It doesn't do anything different than any others, other than I like the way this one feels in my hand better than this one. And not saying that the ergonomics don't matter, right? But all I'm saying is functionality wise, it's changed nothing, right? It's changed absolutely nothing. And it should have been forced in the very early days, so we didn't have this reconciliation now, which is I think causing unnecessary consumer problems, because consumers need it simple, right? So that's
Yep.
what I think.
Yeah. I always get this question, like, everybody wants to become a fueling convenience operator
Mm.
in the EV space. They want to own and operate fast chargers. Sometimes, get the request to build a payback model to own and operate level 2 chargers selling electrons. Can you talk about some of the largest companies that are out there that own assets, uh, where they came from, and what your opinion is on selling electrons across the United States?
Wow, it's a lot to unpack. How long have you got? Let's see. We can shoot it on that. So let's zoom back a little bit. There are certain so electricity as fuel is incredibly inexpensive, and I want to use an analogy. In the early days of Wi-Fi, internet access, basically wirelessly, a million companies went out, like the Boingos of the world and companies like that. If you remember that name from back in the day.
I don't. I'm too young.
That was a legit company, because you couldn't make that name up.
Yeah.
And so imagine that in the early days of the internet, that people were like, people are going to buy subscriptions for public access to Wi-Fi. And then what happened is businesses said, no, wait a minute. I could just, yeah, it cost me a little bit more, but I'll put a few more access points. I'll just give this away because it'll make my coffee shop, my retail store, my whatever, a little nicer. And it really doesn't cost that much more incrementally to be able to do that. Well, guess what? If you want to give fuel to your employees, it costs about as much as coffee, giving them coffee. I'm not kidding, right? It costs, and that's like amortizing the O&M of the charger, the energy, network fees to ChargePoint, all that sort of stuff, $4 a day, which is about what you pay for coffee. But believe it or not, that's what you're spending on coffee for your employees. If you're out there, your facilities department's probably, if they have decent coffee, and I'm not talking a custom barista making you fancy drinks and stuff, the one button coffee makers that make decent stuff, that's about $4 a day. So at about $4 a day, you can give an employee a ton of their fuel for nothing. It's kind of like, it's cheap enough, so why not? Because on the employee benefit basis, it's an easy one. Not all employers are going to do that. Okay, but some will. And some will limit it, but it'll still be there, right? So that's some leakage that's going in that direction. And that's the way it should be, is that some businesses are going to do that. You're going to have a parking operator may decide, hey, their garages are not that full right now because parking operations under a little bit of pressure. So now could you imagine, hey, if you park here, you'll get the first 2 hours of charging for free. I made that. Marketers will come up with many different ways of doing that. Why am I going there? It's so inexpensive that you have to change the way you think about electricity as fuel. And what that does is it narrows the payback equation for owning a charger when so many people could give it away, where you have so much optionality as to acquiring it from home or whatever, that with businesses just each picking up their little piece and filling in the gaps, what it leaves is it leaves the long haul fuel market. The thing that has not, I think, been fully faced by the industry is there still is a belief by some folks out there that if they build charging hubs, that you will forego charging at home or charging in your apartment, right? For that. And what I say is that's too big a pain in the butt to contend with for the average mid-market consumer. So they'll just wait. And we don't need that consumer just yet because there's enough consumers in the front end of the adoption curve that have plenty of access to home charging and things like that. Where by the time we need that piece of the market to convert, street side infrastructure, you're already seeing programs like that. You're seeing multifamily programs, et cetera. So it's going to corner the fueling and convenience market to the long haul use case, which is 10% of the fuel volumetrically, not 10% of the sessions, by the way, 10% of the fuel, not 10% of the visits. So you're taking a huge energy gasoline market. You're cutting the cost, you're cutting the revenue down by the ratio of driving on gasoline to driving on electricity. That's a big ratio, right? 4 or 5x cheaper. Boom. Okay. And now you're saying, oh, now only 10% of that is what you're going to get if you build a fast charge site. I'm not talking against building a fast charge site because I think we need them. We're at the front end of this curve and we're going to need the long haul fast charge sites. But the ones that are going to win are the businesses that are going to serve long haul drivers that have been serving long haul drivers, right? And the new ones that are going to serve people that are going to be there for 20 minutes or so. And where it goes in terms of making money and owning chargers and selling stuff is the multifamily case is actually at scale. It's actually a pretty good case. The problem is you need a lot of subscribers. You need a lot of consumers that are driving EVs in an apartment to justify the cost of doing the work at an apartment complex. But once you start to come up above the hurdle rates there of having enough EVs in the parking lot to justify that, then serving that market as an asset owner is I think, going to be a good one. As they have project companies that do that stuff have headline very low return expectations because they're project investors, but that's okay. It fits their model. You'll see the same with street side, and many cities and towns have outsourced a lot of their infrastructure, parking meters included. So they, having street side programs associated with permit parking zones for residents, you're going to see that as well. And that, because you have more guaranteed utilization or predictable utilization, those things can be priced such that they're, the businesses work as well. You're in the days of an early market. In an early market, the data you're gathering is too sparse to have it show you can't use it to evaluate stuff right now. It's going to change super fast, right? You get to 10, 15, 20% EV penetration, and the first 1% took us 13 years for me, right? And the next 13 years, it's not going to be 1% more, it's going to be a lot, right? A lot of the installed, a good percentage of the install base will have converted. So you're going to be in the eye of the tornado, I think, as we get through some of this macroeconomic hurdle, and we see more makes and models coming out, and we see a healthy used market on EVs, right? And lower cost new EVs, because they have the potential of actually being cheaper on a sticker price basis than the equivalent other garages. You see, it's a function of the volume not being high enough. But once that's all sorted out, there'll be a lot of places where you can own AC or DC assets and make money. But the big diffuse, I want it in front of my, barber shop, or I want it in front of my, picket, mom and pop, grocery store or something like that. That's just going to be the big diffuse fill of people treating it as if it were free Wi-Fi. That's really the amazing part. It's going to be an all of the above list, and it's all going to trigger at different percent penetrations into the install base. So that's also going to vary geographically. California, with much higher penetration in certain areas than other states. So it may happen in multifamily in New York and California and parts of Florida and parts of Texas before it happens in multifamily in some other states that don't have the EV penetration that the ones that I just mentioned do. So it's a complicated patchwork, but that's a head fake. Fast forward the tape, judge business models, not against the now, judge business models against in 10 years with the EV penetration and even if you're conservative about it, the likely cost of an EV, the likely number percentage in every apartment and condominium and city and things like that, what percentage of EVs are going to be there, and then judge it against, could you make a business serving the charging needs of that? I think the answer is going to be yes. So you're going to see a lot of that.
Now, I hear a lot in the automotive space right now, well, not just the automotive space, here from consumers, the challenge of depreciation of electric cars and how that's impacting the market. What's your take?
Oh, my take. I've been preaching this I said, in the beginnings. So in the beginnings of a company, when no one knows who the hell your company is, right? At ChargePoint, this is talking like 8 years ago, right? You have to be brief and evocative when you're in like an industry forum or meeting with the press, or no one hears anything. So here's what I used to say, and it's still true today. I would not, I actually think that the depreciation situation in an early market is a complete head fake. You are going to see a residual value squeeze very soon, actually, very soon now, on gasoline cars, when people start saying, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to unload this thing when at the end of its life, I better early out it, or I better not buy another one. You're going to see leasing companies basically look at that and say, hey, I don't know what the residual value of that gas car is going to be, so I'm going to be very conservative with it. So the lease cost is going to go up, right? Now, right now, what you're seeing is a head fake. You're seeing rapid price war and price cuts because the industry has normalized. So you're seeing all this change. And so where you had a very stable gas car industry, price-wise, the residual values were stable. But you're seeing, price wars where people are fighting for market share in the early days, which is, that's what people do, right? In companies, that's what companies do in the early days of a market. It's causing this buffeting, which is causing a residual value challenge, which is a complete head fake. Because once that normalizes, the real residual value problem is in the gas car. The other thing that I used to always say is, you're not going to have range anxiety for too much longer. You're going to have gas anxiety. And the reason you're going to have gas anxiety is gas stations are going to start to fall below their fixed costs because it's not linear. It's not like a gas station has half the revenue but still survives when it has half the business visits. If you're only making 12% pre-tax profit on a business, which is 12, 15% pre-tax profit, it's pretty run-of-the-mill business, right? If you lose, you still have the same fixed costs, but you lose 30% of your visits, and they've already been suffering from this, right? You see how gas stations deforested in like New York City trying to get gas, right? So now you see the visits go away. So the gas stations just start going away precipitously. So now what used to be convenient, oh, hey, I'm going to stop for my coffee on my way to work at the coffee shop that I like. And oh, by the way, there's a gas station right across the street, and that's 2 blocks before the highway entrance on my way to work. Well, now that gas station that was 2 blocks before the highway entrance on your way from the coffee shop to the highway entrance, they ain't there anymore. So now where's the gas station? It's 4 miles in the other direction. So now at rush hour, right? You have to go in the wrong direction because there ain't enough, they ain't on every corner anymore. And so now you're starting to be like, this is a pain in the butt. I can't, have a tank of gas because it's regulated at my house. And now I got to drive like all over God's creation to basically figure out how to fuel my vehicle. This is a nightmare. That's what we're going to face. In fact, another prediction I used to always say is you're going to see governments or oil companies having to subsidize or change the compensation structure for gas stations so that they can survive on lower visits, because you're going to have a real retail outlet problem because the oil companies don't own that retail space. They've divested of that. They've been run by profit optimizers. And the profit optimizers said the retail side is not what I want to be part of. So they have divorced themselves mostly, not completely, but mostly, of the retail side of that business. When you see Exxon, BP on a banner, that is not most of the time a station that's corporately owned by that oil company. That is a gas station group. It's a business. It can be a mom and pop, or it can be a small regional, or even bigger in some cases, but it's rarer, that own 3, 4, 10, 15, 100 gas stations under franchise. So now when that vaporizes, the oil company, when those guys start suffering, you lose your outlet, you lose your channel for your product. And you still got 70% market share in the install base. Let's pretend it's a world that starts happening when things are 20, 30% penetrated. You got 70, 80% of your cars that are still out there that are buying stuff from you, but you don't have enough outlets for them anymore. So you're accelerating the change to EVs. So it's going to be a really interesting dialogue. I can't wait for that dialogue because you can set your watch by it. It's so obvious that it's going to happen, but it's not what's being talked about now. It's being talked about as the opposite. It's being talked about now as, oh, there's range anxiety. Well, really? It depends on where you live, but in most cases, there isn't.
That feels so far away, but makes all the sense in the world. So when you say 20 to 30% market share, what year is that?
So it's capped by the following, you can do very basic math. 14 to 17 million, we're talking US here, similar numbers in Europe. 14 to 17 million cars is what auto OEMs combined sell a year, and there's 280 million cars and light duty trucks on US roads. Divide, it's almost 19 years. That says if 100% of cars sold tomorrow were electric, it still takes the better part of 2 decades to change out all the vehicles. Now, I think at the end, it goes a little faster because you get the residual value squeeze that we talked about. So people start early out in vehicles, especially fleet owners, they early out that stuff. But you got production capacity limits, and auto OEMs aren't going to put in 4 times their production capacity only 5 years later to have lots of spare capacity that they can't amortize. So they'll let prices go up is what they'll do. And so where am I going with this? If you look at that 17 million as about 5% change rate, not quite, right? In that range, single digit change rate a year, right? For if you could get up the curve, and you're nowhere near up the curve, right? You're nowhere near up the curve. Maybe you're, approaching 20% in some geographies. right? Forget about Norway, you're way up the curve, right? 80% or so of new car sales, or maybe even more now. But let's just take, US and Europe. It's going to take a while to get to that 30% level. But when it gets to that 30% level, it 20, 30, 40%, it starts to, the back end of that is starting to really accelerate. And then you got this sticky residual at the tail end. So it's like the classic S adoption curve. It's really shallow initially, skyrockets, then it levels off, and the last 10 or 15% take forever to get rid of because they have special purpose needs and they're not met by EVs. So you're probably the better part of, you're the better part of you're into the back of the next decade, somewhere between year 5 and year 10, right? Starting from now, where you're at that percent penetration that we talked about, unless something really amazing happens with respect to production capacity and pricing, right? But the but is that the effects of a lot of the things that I've been talking about start showing up at about those penetration rates, and you'll see it in the headlights. So the dialogue is going to change. Is the dialogue going to change this year? Probably not. It's too much fun for some people, I don't know why, to basically promote misinformation, or said differently, be short-sighted with respect to how they talk about a trend that is a mega trend that's going to take 2 decades to work itself out, right? So, if you want to talk about what's going to happen in the next 3 quarters, well, yeah, they're probably right, right? There's a little exaggeration, but they're probably right. But you want to talk about what's going to happen in the next 3 years? Well, then they're probably not right. You want to talk about what's going to happen in the next 6 years? They're definitely not right. Right now, you're starting to get into the range of what I've been talking about, and it's almost math. It's almost irrefutable, right? It's not going to go hydrogen, right? There's a whole bunch of reasons why, and we can get to it on another podcast, right? It's plug-in hybrids are the, sorry, dumbest thing. I keep saying, well, maybe it's going to all go plug-in hybrid. Okay, that's the worst of both worlds. Now I got the maintenance profile of a gas car with too small a battery, and I'm an EV. Okay, who thinks that's a good idea?
It's interesting how that is getting pushed right now in the automotive space. Like, a lot of people are saying, yeah, like, we're going to go electric, but we're going to have some type of a gas component to our vehicles, and the auto manufacturers are already making this decision. And I go back to I don't know if you've seen the BlackBerry movie, but when the guy that owns Resource in Motion, and he
Yeah.
sees Steve Jobs showing the iPhone with the touchscreen, he says, why would anybody not want to keep physical keyboard?
Oh yeah. So the thing I quote all the time about not and I like Walt Mossberg, so I'm hopefully not offending him if he ever hears this. And I hope your audience gets that big. So Walt Mossberg wrote an article about on the introduction of the iPhone, I don't know if essentially I don't know if I could give up my little chiclet keyboard. And I think what everyone missed in the early days, a lot of really smart people missed this, is Apple's vision was the internet in your pocket, and typing out an email was an application in that environment, but not the whole environment. So it wasn't about texting and emailing. It was about the internet in your pocket and everything you can do with,
Yeah.
reformulating the use cases for apps on a small screen, of which one of those apps was email. Now, if you look at it where you flipped cart and horse there, if you flip cart and horse, you might design it differently, and that's what Apple did, right? So we're in exactly the same situation here. You've got people pattern matching on gasoline. They're desperately pattern, like, where's all the charging stations? Well, okay, you're not fueling in the same places, so you don't need as many. But where's we need, if we want to fix the climate, but you still said 15 million cars a year, it's 20 years, but we need it to go faster. Look, no one's more climate sensitive than me. That's a big passion of mine, but we should have started it earlier. We could have, right? But we didn't, right? And so can't make it go any faster. You make it go a little faster, but you can't say, okay, well, in 5 years we've solved it. No, that's not practical, right? When you're moving all this stuff. So what you've got here is exactly that analogy exactly that. Why would anyone want this? And so now I think why automakers like it, and I think why dealers like it, is it has exactly the same maintenance profile. It has exactly the same spare parts profile. Not exactly, because the gas engine give you, I mean, the electric engine will give you some of the wear, take some of the wear pressure off the gasoline engine, but it's more of the same. And more of the same kicks the can down the road a little bit more. But from a technology perspective, dumbest idea, well, not the dumbest idea, but one of the dumbest ideas I've ever seen is to go backwards and basically have a tweener where it's not good at anything. It's not a good EV and it's not a good gas car. It's not good at anything.
Totally. Yep, we're aligned on that one.
Yeah.
So question for you. Tesla, they're an incredible software company. They People think of them as a charging company, but they're not like a commercial sales charging company, or at least they haven't been in the past. Obviously, they've been delving in it recently. Why doesn't Tesla get into the EV charging commercial sales space?
Well, I think they have in some cases, but not, I mean, they're coming from an environment where it was a proprietary environment where most of the software environment and the experience was done between mostly in the car and on their mobile app, and the charger was, kind of coming along for the ride there. Just because it was a closed system, not because they did anything wrong. If you control all the endpoints, you'd minimize where you put complexity. And if you're a charging company and you have to charge every car, I deal with every car company's own vision of how they want to bring software environment to their customers. You have to do something more along the lines of what ChargePoint did, right? And most car companies out there now, you have engaged with ChargePoint, many, for APIs direct into the back end to power their in-dash navigation system and mobile app. In fact, and it take a long time to get those rolled out. Mercedes-Benz is fully rolled, is still evolving it, but they're fully rolled out with that. And others are, you've seen the announcements. I think it's actually one of the things in ChargePoint that frustrated me the most with the outside world is we used to make these announcements and no one quite grokked it. That, someone is integrated with a ChargePoint API for the in-dash experience for their payment, finding the chargers, right? Attribute values and the chargers, reservation capability, right? Mobile app, how their mobile apps basically deal with charging. Under the covers, there's a parallel ChargePoint account in that environment that's set up. It powers the whole thing, and your car and your mobile app have the ability, if they use it, to understand if you've got access control, say at work or at a hotel or whatever, where it's not legal to use it unless you're part of some group. Well, ChargePoint has all the mechanisms for that. So it's not a vending machine for electrons. It's got a lot of optionality and control by the business. That's all fully available now in the in-dash system and the mobile apps, right? Or the technology is fully available for the car companies to do it as they see fit. And that's really awesome. Tesla hasn't had to do that. And why haven't they had to do that? Because they've only been dealing with their own stuff. They didn't do anything wrong. They just only been dealing with their own stuff. So now if they want to get into that, they have to figure that out. Now, why? I have a theory. And it's a theory. I'm not proving this by talking to anyone at Tesla. But if your vision is that in the long term, it's not really a car company, it's a robotaxi company, because and there's probably a messy middle in there where, I might own a car but consign it into while I'm working into a robotaxi network. There's lots of in-betweens. But if that's your vision and the car is going to be out doing its own thing, right? And Elon's a long-term thinker, right? He doesn't care if that doesn't happen next year. He doesn't care if it doesn't happen 2 years from now. He's thinking about, does it happen over the next 10, 15, 20 years? Well, then that's what I'm shooting for, right? Well, if that's what you're shooting for, then when that thing's out on its own, it might be convenient if you're building a business around rideshare to control some of the charging, right? And so it may be strategic for reasons that are not, I love the charging business. I personally do. And I think there's a lot of good stuff in the charging business, but it's serving all the auto OEMs in a generic way, so you can create a great user experience across all auto OEMs is what charging needs to be. It needs to be for all drivers, all the time, consistent user experience, no bias to anyone auto manufacturer, but the full ability for each auto manufacturer to differentiate, use the software and APIs or anything they want to do to differentiate their user experience so they can convince you to buy their car versus someone else's. That's what a charging company needs to do. If you're on the technology, not the asset owner side, if you're on the technology side of charging, that's what ChargePoint has to do. If you think the world is a robotaxi world in the long term, and that all of this is one big head fake, and the existing auto manufacturers that are out there don't see it, and they're under investing in autonomous, and in 10, 15, 20 years, they don't exist because we're not buying as many cars as we used to. You're either buying and consigning into a robotaxi fleet or not even owning and letting an infrastructure fund own the fleet that's consigned in on the platform. Oh my God. Then you would say to yourself, well, I better have a strategic toe in this water. And that might be a component in the thinking. It might be.
It's really interesting. Do you think Tesla's technology for self-driving is the winning technology?
So I'll tell you what I agree with. I agree with the fact that to train an AI to be able to drive in all circumstances, you need an awful lot of training data. And I think that's the reason every car, whether you buy it or not, comes with that FSD computer. Because every car that they've sold is a probe. It's basically generating training data because it can be playing driving. It can be sitting there saying, I'm driving around, pretending I'm driving, but the driver's actually in control. Wait a minute, I don't agree with what the driver just did. Let me send that to Tesla. Driver just slammed on the brakes. I didn't think driver needed to slam on the brakes. What did the driver know that I did? Man, now maybe the drivers did something wrong, but that's how you build I'm dumbing it down, but that's generally how you build a training database. You need a lot of that. It's not 10 cars on the road, fancily outfitted with stuff. You're not going to get enough training data. You get millions of cars out there, all with the FSD computer in there, right? All pretending they're driving, all feeding the comparison between what the driver's doing and what the car would have done if it were driving back into a training computer, a giant training network. Oh my God, you got a big advantage. So that's one advantage. Okay, that's one advantage. The second advantage that I agree with is that I can prove to you mathematically that you can do it with all cameras. And the reason is I'm sitting here today, everyone thinks these two eyes, well, it must be two cameras. Well, no, it's actually, I don't have, unless, lizards can, actually, move their eyes independently. So I guess it's two cameras if we were lizards, but we're not lizards. The two are for me to get depth from, and that only works, by the way, when you're about 18, 20 feet away. Beyond that, I use up, my brain uses other cues, yours does too, for depth. So one camera, that camera's on a swivel that doesn't go 360. My neck, last I checked, is not like an owl. I can't get it all the way around. So now, and I can't move my neck fast enough. Now I do have side view mirrors, but that still gives me blind spots. So I still don't have 360, right? I still don't have 360, right? I got one camera on a limited swivel with a couple of mirrors, right? And what we have is the ability to use an AI in all weather condition, or a natural intelligence. Actually, it's not an AI; it's an NO, I guess, with a human, and we can drive a car. Now, why are we so good at driving a car? Because driving a car is not that hard. What's hard is understanding all the different things in the environment that we see and anticipate. So when someone approaches a crosswalk, I can see it and anticipate it, and I say, "Oh, that person looks distracted." So you got to teach an AI all those situations. It's really, the hard part is the AI learning about the world we live in, not the piloting of a vehicle. The piloting of a vehicle is a very straightforward thing to teach an AI how to do. It's how I interpret orange cones in a construction site with a person with one of those little stop signs that flips around, when they're trying to flow control, when they close one lane, and they're not looking at me. They got their back turned to me and they don't see me, right? And it's raining and it's dark, right? And so it's those situations that make this so hard. And so I think the camera approach is, in the long term, we're the proof that that's possible, right? Humans are the proof that that's possible. And you need an awful lot of data. and they've got access to an awful lot of data. Now, are they the only people with that? No, but it's a small club. It's a small club. It's not a big club.
It's so interesting because obviously it's just it's probably the most contended topic around EV that, I know my family doesn't support self-driving, but I've had an electric car since 2015, and the software updates just keep making it better and better. There was a location in Maine where my Model S would start swiveling back and forth, and then it would veer off the road, and it doesn't do that anymore.
Yeah. Well, I actually have an example, literally making a left into my neighborhood, which has a tree in the middle, and you have to kind of go around the tree to get to the right side of the road to be driving on. And I've had an experience with my Tesla. By the way, my wife has an Ioniq 6. Its lane keeping is actually quite good. It doesn't have the same full self-driving turned on yet anyway that my Tesla has. But with my Tesla in particular, there was one, it used to never make that left. It used to try to go down the wrong side because it couldn't see around the tree. And now it's figured out how to, well, a while ago, it would like pause for a minute and then it would go and suddenly it started doing the right thing, but in a not smooth way. And then it went backwards and started making the mistake again. So much like how AIs learn is you don't quite, it's not always 2 steps forward. It might be 10 steps forward and 1 step back in some other areas because the training data reinforces some things and negatively and positively, and some things change. So it actually went backwards. And now it's way better. And now it handles that situation better than I've ever seen it handle that situation. But it took a step back for a while. And I don't think they went backwards on their algorithm. I think it's not really an algorithm, it's an AI. I don't think they went backwards on the machine learning system. I think it's an artifact of how machine learning systems evolve, which I think is what I'll end with this. I actually think it's what makes it very challenging regulatory wise. You can't ask Tesla or anyone else that's not rules based or rules structured with an AI underneath, but that's in a tight rules framework. If it's truly a machine learning system, you cannot say, what will it do in this exact situation? Well, I don't know exactly what it's going to do. Let's try. I mean, that's the answer, right? Well, let's try it and see what it does. Because it's not like you can go inspect code, right? It's a giant neural net, right? And so it's not like you can go and inspect it and say, so what's going to have to happen, I think, is the equivalent of a driving test. You basically put the machine learning system, much like a 16-year-old, through a driving test, because the manufacturer actually can't say for certain, and then as it keeps learning, you can't say for certain that it hasn't changed the way that it changes lanes. It might improve the way it changes lanes in most scenarios and not improve it in others. And so as it evolves, you don't quite know exactly how it's evolved, because it's evolving sort of like exactly like how we learn in a more limited capacity, because we have much bigger neural nets in our brains. But that's what it's doing. So the regulatory challenges are, it's not rules based, so it's not deterministic. So the creators of it can't say, well, I know exactly what it's going to do, right? Like you saw the Sora demo, the OpenAI guys that generate saw a Sora demo.
Yeah.
You couldn't ask the OpenAI guys, so when I feed in this prompt, what's it going to do? Well, they would say, well, let's feed in the prompt and see. It's going to generally do what your prompt said.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. It's going to generally do what your prompt said.
I'm sure for some people you're getting them excited for the future, and for a few other people you're scaring them too.
Yeah. I think I'm an optimist. I think we'll figure out humans are good at solving these problems. We'll figure it out.
Well, hey, thank you so much for taking the time and doing this. This was awesome. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah,
All
good
right.
luck.
All right. Take care.
See you.